Hey guys, it's Drew. I'm here to make my video for the week. And I didn't really know what I wanted to talk about this week because this week's been pretty crazy with school. School starting again, uni, uni life. But I thought I'd talk to you guys this week about how um, my spiritual practice impacts my practical everyday life and how I go about working those two together because the common theme that seems to run through every time that I am embarking on a career choice or doing something in my business or trying to make a decision spiritually, those two are so interweaved into my identity that it's very hard to separate them. And I find that when I do separate them, that's when the conflict happens. So it's come about that there's a lot of stuff I want to do in my lifetime. I have big plans. I've always had big plans, but I always struggle to execute them because they are so large, and breaking them down into smaller pieces can be difficult. I'm learning to do that, and I'm learning to do that in my spiritual practice as well because I tend to have these very large plans to do certain workings, and if I don't break those workings down, they don't get done. I get overwhelmed, my anxiety, um, both like personally and just overall when everything else like starts to get on top of me. I just tend to struggle with it, and it's something that I've had to really self-identify with and accept and find ways to move through that. Because like spirituality is part of my way of coping with my mental health and my anxiety too. So everything's so freaking interwoven together. So it got me thinking um, about how I work through that. Uh, because, like I said, I've realized that there's so many things I want to do in my life, and so many of them are very influenced by spirituality. They are very influenced by my occult practice. They are very influenced by my occult business because I predominantly write um, in that topical area. And I don't really foresee myself branching out too far into different areas. Like, I have considered how impactful it might be to my financial arena to be able to, you know, pick some non interesting topics and write about them because I can write. That is definitely one of my skills, but it doesn't bring me any purpose or passion or drive. And I mean, I've had a pretty hard life already. Most people have, but I definitely know that I'm very hard on myself about the hard life that I've had. So I don't want to make it any harder by doing something that's going to really make me depressed and put me in a perspective where, I'm just doing it for the money, and money's never really been that important to me in that perspective anyway. But going back to the spiritual thing, how I decided or figured out what I want to do um, spiritually, when I was writing about it, a lot of it was reflecting in what I need to do to basically make an income for myself, make a name for myself, continue to help out and reach out to you guys because I know that whatever I'm talking about is often reflected in your lives as well because it is such a prominent concern or prominent pathway in our community. A lot of us are and have come to spirituality to sort of decide and define and find ways for us to use our rebellious nature or our different paths to create a better life for ourselves, our families, our communities. And so I ended up um, making lists because that's like always the first thing that I ever do when it comes to defining what I want to do. Like a spiritual practice as well. If you guys remember when I was living somewhere else, I showed you guys my journals, and a lot of them had lists of things that I would do or plans that I would have for a particular month, like focuses that I would do. And I'm not gonna lie, like focus is such a hard thing for me. Um, being creative, being ADHD, having Asperger's, having all this sort of neurological shit that goes on in my head, I find it really difficult to just sit down and do one thing. I find it really difficult to focus on one particular topic, one particular book, one particular business, subject. Like, I don't understand how people can do that. I have tried, and that's okay because it's not supposed to be for me. But I find that the first thing I do is to create lists, and by creating those lists, I can see where, like, the spiritual workings I need to do and the things I need to focus on there. But by making also the lists with my career path and the practical side of things, that's when I started to see those two things like coming together and crossing over. And I don't think it's helpful to keep these things in your head. I know a lot of us are journalers or writers or list makers and planners anyway, so I'm preaching to nobody really. But yeah, I wanted to just sort of talk to you guys about that because I think process is just as important as practice, figuring out what works for you and what doesn't, and knowing that that's constantly evolving. Um, I don't think there's ever going to be a time when I will strictly be able to focus on one particular thing. And it's interesting because one of my classes this last week, sorry, talked about I'm taking an entrepreneurial class because I'm working on my business, but I'm also working on like a couple of micro businesses as well. And again, that comes back to my spirituality. Like, I don't ever just work with one god or one goddess or one particular area of interest. I've always got like these mini sections, and it's when I can trust myself and trust the process that those things all interweave together. But it's when I think about them as a separate entity that they don't. And this came back again with my businesses. Um, like, for example, a couple of things that I do want to do in this lifetime is have a publishing company, continue to review, continue to be a freelancer, start public speaking because I know that I can be good at it when I do it, and I've had experience in the past and been successful, and I know that voice is part of that as much as it is my spiritual practice as well. And so seeing those things, like seeing those smaller businesses as well, I was able to see again where those interconnect, where the spirituality comes into it, um, where the creativity comes into it, where they all bleed together. So that's how I started doing it. And I guess the second thing that I do when I am focusing on this particular process, I guess you can call it, is that I need to heavily rely on writing for this, because there's so many ideas, and until you can write those ideas down, until you can write those thoughts out, do those channelings, do the automatic writing, do the meditations, you don't really have a firm grasp on the possibilities, but also where the discrepancies are as well. Um, Writing down these lists really does help me to focus on what I really could be focusing on as well. I think it was last year, I had a very big interest in working with multiple pantheons and limited time, finite time. And so I had to sit down and reflect on it and go, okay, well, you've got very limited time because you're at university. What could you be working on in your spiritual practice that's going to reflect what you're already doing in your practical life as well? Because for me, also fundamentally, it's about tying those two together as well. So I'd want to be doing working that is going to push me forward in the physical. I do love my astral dreaming stuff. I love being up in my head and writing and doing fiction and gaming and being imaginative, but also there is times when I just need to really just ground my practice and my study in moving me forward in the physical sense, in terms of, like I said, career, relationships, home, stuff like that. Like, and again, it comes back down to lists. Like, you've got to figure out, well, I got to figure out, you know, what's going on in my life, like what stuff am I working on, and how can I, you know, what gods do I need to contact, what books do I need to be reading, what topics are going to really help me to shape my perception of particular beliefs or tools or systems. So it's a very fascinating concept, well, multiple concepts that like combine everything together. And I'd be really interested to hear your perspectives about how you do your spiritual working and how you integrate that into your physical life. I know that there's been, like, we've touched on this subject before, I've touched on it before as well. But I would like to talk more about how that process happens for me and see how it evolves as I'm becoming more conscious of it too, because I think that the more conscious of it I am, the more I can accept it. The more I can accept that, yes, like, you are building a niche business, you are building something that isn't necessarily traditionally going to be accepted out in the global economy, but that brings purpose to me and it brings purpose to you guys, and it has for a very long time, and it brings support and community. And, you know, I've met and some amazing people through this path, this career path as well. So, and that process is just as important to finding out that you won't be sitting in an office job, that you won't be following a traditional pathway. And that can be really scary. And it can be scary too when you're, again, like linking it back to spirituality, for all of us who come to the path and have to carve our own way and find our own way. A lot of it is, you know, reading the same books and asking the same questions when you come to the path until you can kind of like figure out what works for you. Like when I started, I was reading about Wicca, and very soon that just did not sit with me. And it's taken me 3 years to craft my own ideas about being a chaos magician who is eclectic and, you know, pulls from everything and doesn't have strict traditions or strict rules. I make my own rules up, I make my own practice up, I dabble with everything, I use what works, I discard what doesn't. And, you know, like one day I might be a Luciferian, and the next day I might be a Christian, and the next day I might be a Buddhist. Like, I take from everything and then I just push out what doesn't work. And again, so it's like, you could relate that back to life too. When you're looking at your career path, it's like you have to try stuff out. You have to try the clues on to see if they fit, or, you know. So, and yeah, so that's really what I wanted to talk to you guys about this week. I hope it made sense. My brain's so filled with university work, so much reading, and I'm still working on my book, my um, astrological workings, and at the end of the month, I'm going to be working with this to create some blogs, some blog posts, some discussions, and use what I've learned about this process to, I guess, you know, share something that you might want to try yourself, because I think it's a really great process. It's fun, challenging. We're in Sagittarius now, which I guess this is a perfect time for me to be making this video, because again, it comes back to, what do I want my life to look like? How do I work these two parts of myself together? And how do you guys do that? How do you guys fit your spiritual and physical lives together? Okay, I will talk to you all next week. Bye.